Hi, this is 52 Miniatures, and I'm Alex. Does Warhammer take place on Earth? And what would that look like in a diorama? And is it time to dry brush with oil paints? This is a Warhammer Space Marine from the Horus Heresy box Age of Darkness. That was a lot of information in one go, I know. Especially if you haven't got a clue about Sci-Fi Warhammer, like me. From what I gather, Horus, an important fellow 30,000 years into the future, did a bad thing, thus the heresy. Imagine Judas Iscariot in power armor, only swap out the Romans for chaos gods and give each of the disciples huge armies and add bolt guns and planetary destruction. This all a setting for a game that takes place on your tabletop using these little plastic miniatures as in-game markers. Or because of the lovely beaks, one can paint them up just for the fun of it. My fun started with rattle can priming this miniature with Vallejo Dark Grey. Before getting into too many details on painting future grim dark soldiers, let's talk a little bit about this video's sponsor, and thus Grim Dark Vikings. Vikings War of Clans is an exciting MMO strategy game with PvP and PvE battles. It's a world where you can create an invincible army, uncover the cunning traps of your enemies, and become the mightiest conqueror among millions of players. Just like Horus before the heresy, without the bolt guns. I've always enjoyed building little cities, gathering armies to bring forth upon the battlefield. There is something to be said about a game with a research timeline, after all. In Vikings War of Clans, we can manage resources, scout enemies, initiate attacks, engage in diplomacy, strive for victory. In a Viking setting, kind of reminds me of cooking a meal for my son that he'll end up not complaining about. And just like my son, Vikings is about to celebrate its 7th anniversary. This means a lot of special in-game events and competitions. For example, this very August, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the speed of learning, construction, research and training will be increased by 20%. So now is a great time to check out Vikings War of Clans, linked down below in the description. And now, back to the Space Marines and the heresy and the end of the world as we know it, and honestly, a paint job that in the end maybe is not all that far away from a Space Wolf, while on the subject of Vikings. I've decided to try and dry brush using oil paints. Dry brush is not really the right term, as oil paint does not dry very fast, so there won't be much actual dry brushing. But the means of application is the same as when dry brushing. I mixed up several mixes of oil paint, diluting them slightly with odorless white spirit, ranging from a military green, just slightly brighter than the Vallejo Dark Grey, up to light grey, experimenting with some added blue for cooler tones. Dry brushing is in theory a relatively rudimentary painting technique, using very little acrylic paint on a large brush so that when you rub the brush against the miniature, paint mainly sticks to the raised areas and not in the crevices. This effect is what I'm after, combined with the fact that oil paint is rather thick and stays wet a long time. Thus, I could probably create gradual steps, blending paint on the miniature, get some fancy gradients like wet blending without too much time spent. I started out with a rather fluffy dry brush from Army Painter for the first layer, but soon realized it was more sort of rubbing paint around rather than adding paint. Using that as my weapon, I developed a technique of adding paint with a regular flat brush, then smoothing out the transitions between layers with the fluffy dry brush. You might be wondering about the theme here. Well, as it turns out, Warhammer does take place on Earth, just in such a faraway future that it might as well not be. So I thought I'd take things a little closer to home, making a diorama that would remind us of Earth, but also paint this Space Marine a little more like what maybe a military uniform would look like 30,000 years into the future. Well, that grimdark Warhammer future and its Imperium, at a glance at least, does very much appear the totalitarian fascist state. And because these types of regimes never surprise in the choice of colour, we're going for traditional military vibe. Green, grey, steel. I did add a little dark blue indigo to some of the shaded areas to then move on to the brightest highlights. I worked pretty fast, there was no fancy trickery going on, but the oil paint was actually getting a little sticky. I do think these AK Interactive Abteilung oil paints harden a little faster than regular oils, but this is a layman's guess. Regardless, I thoroughly enjoyed this technique. It was very simple to build up nice gradients and depth. There is a texture going, but in this case a texture that adds character to the armor. I would like to get my hands on an even softer, fluffier, dry brush style brush and experiment further with this technique. Also, of course, to try different colors, but I'm honestly quite impressed by this first look try. I left the miniature to dry for a couple of days to make sure the oil paint had cured before varnishing everything with a satin varnish. The varnish here is not only a safety step to ensure that coming acrylic paints stick well to the oil painted surface, but it's also because I want to end all this with an oil wash, and I don't want any future white spirit to mess up the wonderful oiled dry brush. Varnish is our friend, dear painters. I had an idea that the diorama, this dystopian image of the future, was going to be a winter landscape. You know, a nuclear winter or the next ice age, I don't know. Thus my thoughts went to winter camouflage, and while googling around I saw images of a Second World War German soldier with red stripes on the winter white camo. An indication of rank, probably. I like the idea. It would make the Marines stand out in a dreary winter landscape, and it does look a little more future fascist. Freehand painting is not my strongest side, all the more reason to practice, I guess. And so, hopefully, next time the red line on the Marine's leg will actually be centered, straight and thin. I must admit, being in awe of people who can paint. I mean, actually draw things. Anyway. While edge highlighting with an almost, but not quite, white paint, I've not painted many Space Marines, but I'm surprised at how easy, quote unquote, they are to edge highlight. A light-handed stroke using the edge of the brush against all the little edges of the miniature, and things start to look nice very fast. Then, what usually happens, happened. My inner, grim dark future fan reached out and steered the brush, in a moment of pure joy creating the first couple of scratch marks. It was just downhill from there. I mean, the future is not bright. There's a nuclear winter going on. Your boss, Horace, tried to kill Jesus. I mean the Emperor. You're confused because, in theory, nothing remains of old cultures on Earth, yet all the symbolism remains. It's 30,000 years into the future, yet swords are still in fashion. Your librarian now does magic, but no one trusts a robot. And in the middle of all this, no one has been around to refurbish your power armor for ages. Sorry, I got carried away there. I find a great way to get depth to chipping like this is to paint a dark and consequently bright line randomly round the chipped area. This requires quite a pointy brush, but the upside is I don't really have any logic to it. Some dark grey here, some off-white there, and in the end things feel a lot more three-dimensional than before. Last step is more oil paint. First a brown for dirt and a rust for staining or filtering the chipped areas. I use oil paints for this because they smooth out so nicely. I can add an unceremonial blob here and there, and then go back with a little white spirit and smooth out and refine the result into a natural looking dirt stain. I made sure to use a greenish brown for the dirt. We could say it's a grime from an industrial polluted earth or something like that, but the point is to use a color of dirt that is apparently different from the rust staining, so as not to visually mix the two types of staining up. Application-wise, the same technique goes for the rust staining. Because the oil paint does not interfere with the acrylic surface, I can add paint and clean it off with white spirit, and I can redo, and it's a very pleasant workflow. The last step is a dark blue indigo pin wash, getting some even darker recesses here and there. I dilute the oil paint heavily with white spirit. Because of my previous satin varnish of the entire model, this wash will flow beautifully. As you can see, I'm not washing the entire miniature, just dabbing on some wash where I want it. And that's it. Before this mini goes on the diorama, I will matte varnish it, but first I'll let it sit for a day to let the oil paints cure. The diorama. The idea, actually brushed upon in a previous video, is based on a scene from Planet of the Apes. "You maniacs, you blew it up, damn you," comes to mind. The Statue of Liberty, or in this case, small little replica bits of it printed out on my resin printer, will represent the forgotten past, the proof that Terra is in fact Earth and that Space Marines walk the same planet as us, only way into the future, apparently preferring Latin. In a correct Warhammer state of mind, this would not happen. 30,000 years is a long time. Not only would someone have scavenged all that copper a long time ago and built weapons of mass destructions out of it, but things would just not look the same. The planet would be rather more covered in cities and stuff. To further enhance the feeling of lost civilization, I thought it would be cool if the Statue of Liberty, or what remains of it, would in fact be under water, only the top of the torch breaking the surface. The surface frozen, a winter landscape up top with a lone space marine wandering the icy wastes. I'm in fact then creating an underwater environment. I stuck to cool, muted colors. I did not want a totally dead environment, but it sure can't be thriving with life. A little algae perhaps, some seaweed, and of course a shark. Sharks have been around for like 400 million years, so 30 or 40,000 years here and there is no big deal for a shark. All these details, 3D assets, I've downloaded free to use from my Thingiverse, linked down below. Thank you to the creators of these sculpts. The shark is in fact a zombie shark, but I figured that won't really show once I pour resin on all of this. I've never poured resin before. I had some resin I thought I was going to use for my modular river project, but never did. I had already opened the resin though to make a test pour, and so I figured I should use the resin now that I had the opened bottle. One of the reasons I even considered doing this underwater scene. I had no fear pouring the resin, feeling confident as there had been no issues with the test pour done a few weeks back. But after a while, the resin started to get really hot, as in there was smoke. Hot. Very glad I was wearing my respirator and protective gloves. Everything deformed, kind of slowly exploding, melting the hot glue that held everything together. Well, you can see the result. I'm no resin expert. Either the resin reacted to something in the diorama, or it's just a matter of mass. There were no issues with the resin that didn't go into the diorama, that cured beautifully. I followed the instructions as to how much resin I could pour, being way under the maximum amount, but there was nothing written about depth. Maybe this resin was just not meant for deeper pours. Regardless, I had to start again, this time without resin. Not because I didn't want to, just because I didn't have any more resin, not enough for an underwater scene. So I altered my plans, reverting to the scene from Planet of the Apes, a beach, calm waters, the remnants of a former civilization sticking out of the sands. This did not quite feel as original, and a bit of an adaptation for my winter-themed Space Marine. It's even more confused now. It's also going to miss its shark friend. I like that image. Space Marines are kind of like sharks. The genetically perfected, quote-unquote, hunter. The kind of animal most would back away from if sighted, especially if weaponized. Sand is probably one of the most difficult textures to emulate. Superglue and baking powder creates a very fine texture, but it's not easy to shape into dunes and such. I found this rust texture by Green Stuff World. It is meant to simulate rough corrosion, but it's a lot finer grained than most texture pastes and makes a pretty good sand. Sand is not only difficult to simulate texture-wise, it's darn difficult to paint. Trying to retain some kind of depth and shadow without making it look too dark. I tried lots of different paints, highlighting, mixing hues, getting the wrong hues, too brown, too yellow, too red, too green. In the end, the airbrush and finally some pigment powders helped me create something that to me passes for a sandy beach. Staying within familiar territory for water effects this time, I used UV resin for the larger body of water. Not sure why the Space Marine is dipping its toes, but at least we're getting an explanation for all the rust. UV resin hardens when exposed to UV light. It's actually quite handy sometimes as an instant glue. Just make sure to not get the stuff on your skin. UV resin can be semi-cured and then shaped. With a bit of practice, pretty cool water effects can be created. But I poured flat and then relied on gloss Mod Podge to create some wave-like action to the water. This does take some time to dry completely, but it's pretty handy for this type of thing. After the Mod Podge was dry, I applied some Green Stuff World splash gel to the crests of the waves and around the rocks and shoreline and the legs of the Space Marine. This dries to quite a realistic water splash shape. It does dry clear, a good thing, but I wanted a little white crest on the waves and that. Add some action to the water. This I just painted on with regular white acrylic paint. And there we are, after a slight hiccup, my Does Warhammer Happen on Earth diorama. I'm happy with this. The little diorama is a simple setting with a lot of story, and the Marine turned out surprisingly nice. I very much want to continue experimenting with the dry brush style approach with oil paints. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments. And please like the video if you liked it. This helps a lot. If you want to support even further, there are links down below to the 52 miniatures in Patreon. Thank you for watching. Bye.